Hello and welcome once again to this series of conversations that we're calling Beyond Oil. Now, as I said in the essay that kicked this project off, we're not trying to convince you that the transition to a low carbon future is going to happen. It is happening. What I want to do is help you understand the sheer volume of wealth that will be transferred out of our current fossil fuel setup and into clean energy alternatives. This will, according to a number of the figures that I've seen, amount to between 95 and 110 trillion US dollars, which is the biggest movement of capital in peacetime. Now, there will, of course, be plenty of investment opportunities to take advantage of this movement of capital, and we're getting together over this series to shine a light on a few of those for you. But I don't want you to think that we're cheerleading for this clean, green energy future. You know us better than that. So we're diving headlong into any emerging investment being fraught with danger for the uninitiated. And if you're going to do well out of the clean energy boom, and why shouldn't you, you need to know which ideas are worth your attention and which you should steer clear of. Now, helping us tap the brakes, I guess, a little bit today is Port Phillip Publishing's editorial director and my longtime friend, Greg Canavan. How's it going, Greg?
Good, Woody. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Getting used to just being shut down, which is, I don't know if it's a version of Stockholm syndrome or whatever, but we're kind of managing.
We're managing, but we're not friends with our captors.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so coming back to these conversations that are beyond oil that we're having, I know you're every bit as bullish on this trend from a long-term perspective as most of our other editors here are. But you don't believe readers should go rushing into the clean energy sector just blindfolded, do you?
Absolutely not. And I guess just to reiterate what you were saying in the introduction and to put some context around my views, bullish would be, I guess, one way to put it. As you said, it is happening, and there's evidence out there. I mean, the Australian Energy Market Regulator has put out studies. They do it every 2 years. The last one just came out at the end of July. It's called an integrated system plan to show how we're moving away from the centralized electricity grid that's fired by coal-fired power stations towards a decentralized system powered by renewables. So they are planning for this. It is going to happen. I guess from my perspective, seeing what has happened around the world and looking at other nations that have done this or are a lot further down the track in this transition than we are, I am skeptical about how well we can do this. And certainly from an investment perspective, I think you need to be very careful about what type of projects and what type of companies that you invest in. And as you said, you can't just go headlong into it saying, well, this is going to happen, therefore anything is going to be a winner. There will be a lot of wasted capital in this transition. And that's mostly because it is managed by big bureaucracies, and big bureaucracies, yes, they can get the top-down planning right, but when you're directing funds into certain winners and losers, some of those might not be the best economic outcomes. So, we'll probably talk about a few of those issues as we go through the chat. But look, just to sort of sum up my position, I understand it's happening. I'm interested from a research and investment perspective how we can position our clients to take best advantage of that. But like you say, I don't think it would serve anyone too well by being overly bullish and thinking that whatever investment you make in the sector is going to pay off over the long term.
Yeah, right. You mentioned you said a few other countries are quite further down the track than Australia are, and they run into issues. But let's just start on that point. Why do you think other countries are leading Australia in the race to this transition to sort of cleaner energy tech and things like that? Is it partly because the fossil fuel industry has got a super tight or a tighter grip on us down here than, say, other countries?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Australia's got the world's most abundant reserves of coal, and a lot of that's high quality coal. So it doesn't, even though it is a emitter of carbon, it's not as much as, say, other forms of coal deposits around the world. And we built our system based on our natural advantages like that. So we've always had the ability to generate cheap electricity via coal. And it's as simple as that. Some other countries probably haven't had that natural advantage, so they've moved towards the renewable transition a little bit quicker. Germany, for example, they've spent over $500 billion on their energy transition over the past 10 or 15 years, or they're projected to have spent, I think by 2025 from the numbers I was reading. Yet their energy prices are twice as much as what they are in France, which relies a little bit more on nuclear energy for their energy sources. So that's what I was saying. If you do this too quick, just with the mindset of saying, well, we've got to move to renewables without thinking about the economics of it and what the end cost of electricity is going to be, it ends up with society paying more for its electricity. Yes, you might have clean energy, but it's going to be quite expensive as well.
The other thing that you and I have been talking about recently is especially this week, is the pretty dire situation in California right now. Do you want to just briefly explain? I think it was me, you, and Dan Denning. We were on a chain. And Dan's he's a good friend of ours, started Portfolio back in the day. He's skeptical as well of not so much the technology and the way that we're going. It's the fact that you can just switch now. I don't think you can. Can you just explain what happened in California recently, and for the viewers that may not be familiar with it, and whether or not it's a cautionary tale for Australians who wanted to rush into renewables?
Well, I don't think, okay, so just to set the scene, California, late summer over there, going through a heat wave, and they're having to deal with rolling blackouts. They don't have the energy power at peak times to be able to satisfy the demand that comes through from everyone switching on their, their coolers and that sort of stuff. It was funny, just this week I saw a tweet from the mayor of LA, who tweeted out to all his citizens of the probably, what is it, the second or third largest city in the US, to everyone. He said, it's 3 o'clock, turn down your thermostats, turn on your fans, turn off your lights if you're not using them, unplug all your appliances. We've got to conserve
start
energy.
Sweating.
I mean, this is the home of Silicon Valley. This is the home of where all the technology, or a lot of the technology for these advances in energy, is coming from. Yet the state that houses these technologies is struggling to deal with peak power demand. The reason because of that, and I don't think Australia's in a situation like this, but over the past 20 or 30 years, if you go back and look at the history of California and its, I guess, its domestic or state management, I don't think I'd be too out of line by saying it's a pretty corrupt political system there. And there's been systematic attempts to completely discredit the nuclear industry over there. There's a nuclear power plant called San Onofre in 2013 that was shut down. Diablo Canyon is being, or they're trying to shut down that by 2025. Nuclear energy is probably one of the largest and the cleanest sources of energy you can produce, and it can provide a huge amount of baseload power. So if you had those nuclear power plants online, you wouldn't be having these rolling blackout problems. It can generate such a huge amount of electricity, but from the way I've read it, what happened over there in the previous decades was that because nuclear energy was so large and could generate such a huge amount of electricity, it also generated a huge amount of profits and revenue to the owners of those stations. So the idea was to use fear about nuclear weapons and nuclear fallout and all those sorts of things to get these stations shut down, and then to invest in renewables or gas or other forms of electricity generation. And then that would mean that there'd be more money coming in for those things. So there's a lot of corruption that's gone in over the past sort of couple of decades that's led to California's current situation. But as I said, like if Australia doesn't manage this transition properly, we're going to see similar things. I mean, we live in Melbourne. I remember the hottest day of the year in January earlier this year. We had, like my suburb, there was rolling blackouts across Melbourne. And that's, once again, power plants have closed in Victoria. We've got increased renewables coming in. And the real big question mark over renewables is how do they deal with peak demand at certain times when you need a lot of energy coming into the system. So that's the question that we're going to have to try to solve over the next 20 years as we make this transition.
And part of the effort to solve those problems are the big expensive projects that are currently hitting the headlines at the moment. Like one that we know pretty well is the Snowy 2.0 hydro project in your home state of New South Wales. You're not convinced, are you?
Well, look, I think that the actual Snowy hydro project itself is an amazing feat of engineering. Everyone knows the history of that project, and it's been around for a long time. I guess the question mark whether the extension for Snowy River, which was announced, I think, in 2017 by the Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Turnbull. It was initially announced as a $2 billion project. Expectations are that that's now going to blow out to over $10 billion. There are reports that it will consume 40% of its own energy in transferring the water around to the different reservoirs, because there's 27 kilometres of tunnels that the water has to travel through, whereas the most efficient plants in the world are roughly between 500 metres and a couple of kilometres of water movement. So this new Snowy River Hydro will be the longest tunnels in the world for a hydroelectric system. So there's question marks, A, over the cost, and secondly, over the efficiency of it. And the other criticism of it is that it's a highly centralized, effectively, hydroelectric systems are natural storage systems. They're sort of natural batteries. So that the idea is that all the renewables that are coming online in New South Wales and Victoria will generate a lot of the electricity for the water to move, and then they can release the water and generate the electricity when the wind isn't blowing, when the sun's not shining, that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's a centralized system, whereas the technology or the people that are running the shift from fossil fuel to renewables are saying that it should be a decentralized system. We should be looking at hundreds of smaller hydro plants around the rivers and lakes of the various positions in New South Wales and Victoria, rather than concentrated all in one massive engineering project. Then there's also the criticisms and issues over the destruction of a lot of natural park areas in the Kosciuszko National Park to get this thing done. So yeah, a lot of issues with it. Sounds good when it's announced, but then when you get into the finer detail of it, it doesn't look as good.
But so you've spoken a lot about the cost of it all, and there's a cost of generating energy, and I know renewables aren't there yet, but the general consensus, definitely amongst our editors, I think, especially the more forward-looking ones, is that it's going to get there eventually. So what will that be the tipping point in Australia for mass adoption, do you think? The cost coming down?
Well, I guess it has to be. And yes, we will get there, and you've got to cross your fingers and hope that technology will get us there, because at the moment, in order for renewables to become reliable, you need massive battery storage capacity for that to happen. It's all well and good, there's renewables can generate significant power, but they cannot do it all the way through the day or all the way through the night. There's just that they're not up to that task yet. And I think we're just hoping that technology will get to a point where the battery storage capacities and the technology will allow that to happen. My view is I'm a little bit more of a backward-looking editor, and my view is that we need to really understand that the technology will get us there, rather than just cross our fingers and hope, shut down all our coal-fired power stations in the expectation that we're going to stumble upon this technology that allows us to store as much energy as we need to store. I'm not a specialist in this, but I think a lot of people and a lot of our listeners are probably like me, where they're just thinking, well, common sense, it just says you need to plan this. And to be fair, we are planning it. There's updated reports that come out on a rolling two-year basis from the energy regulator to explain how this transition is going to happen, of all the different interconnectivity, because you've got the East Coast nations like Queensland, South Australia, New South Wales, Tasmania, Victoria, all connected in the national electricity market. So there's a lot of interconnectors that need to be connected up to the new hydro and wind, the hydro, the wind and the solar farms that are getting built. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen, but I think the crucial point of it is the storage technology. If that's not up to scratch, then we're going to find ourselves with rolling blackouts, higher electricity costs. And so if the technology doesn't keep up, then with our aspirations, then I think we will find ourselves in a spot of bother. Having said that, we all know throughout history that technology does evolve, technology does improve. So,
and it tends to deliver eventually. You just don't know how it's going to actually happen. But it does seem there's like a drive from the from policy, from government, to make sure it's going to happen. I mean, there's been news reports that I think I forwarded between me, you, and Callum Newman actually about Australia becoming a exporter of renewable energy in the not too distant future. That's what they'd like to happen. Don't know how far away that is, but
Well, that's one of those things where, you know, it sounds brilliant, you know, and I think
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of people involved in building these massive solar farms in northern Australia and sending the electricity to Singapore. Sounds brilliant. Whether that's gonna eventuate or not, or what sort of power loss you get in cables going over that distance is another question. So there's a lot of will to make this happen. And as I said, like I'm recognizing that it is happening, and I'm recognizing there's a lot of money behind it. I'm just more of an interested skeptic. You know, I want to look at this. I want to see how it's playing out. But I certainly want to make sure that any investment opportunities that are coming up, and to be fair, that there's not a hell of a lot in Australia at the moment. I think Australia is still early stages with this stuff, and a lot of listed investments aren't necessarily great. You know, profitable companies, that sort of stuff. But I know, you know, Europe's a lot further down the track than we are, even the UK, the US. So there's probably some really good investment opportunities offshore. But that will come to the Australian market. You know, the money will come, the investment will come, and there will be opportunities that eventuate. But I'm just not seeing any particularly striking ones at the moment.
Right. What will need to happen, do you think, before you do start noticing some?
Look, I think it's just time. You know, I mean, as I said, this is happening. There's a plan from 2020 to 2040 to get us to, you know, almost double the renewable capacity we're at the moment, phasing out of coal-fired power stations. As the technology develops, as costs drop, you're going to see more and more capital go into these areas. I mean, power, electricity, that powers an economy. So money will flow into it. It's just a matter of, you know, I just think being selective and being patient, observing, which is what we're trying to do now. We're trying to have a discussion about, you know, the sorts of things that we could be expecting in the years to come, and how all this might unfold. And I think that's why it's worth us having these discussions and really trying to get our heads around it now, so we can be prepared when the opportunities do come up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part of our large remit of our business, really, is to try and figure out where the world is going. And you know, when I was talking to Ryan Dintz, I know that what he feels is that there's when oil was the predominant energy of the last century, renewables, in his view, is going to be the predominant energy story of the next 100 years. But in these transition periods, there's huge amounts of disruption. And the idea really is to figure out which companies are going to, from an investment point of view anyway, is to which companies are going to be leading that transition, and how do you spot them? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you figure that?
Absolutely, and that's an answer that I don't have at the moment, but it's certainly one that, you know, I'm interested in pursuing and seeing how this trend plays out. But as you said, it's a long-term trend. You know, it's not something that you need to jump on tomorrow, but it's something you need to start exploring. And, you know, especially for people with superannuation, you know, that there's some long-term money in superannuation, and these are the sorts of opportunities that I think you'd be interested in for that type of capital.
Mm. Well, thanks, Greg. Could probably talk for another hour, but I want to keep these conversations relatively short, as they're really the warm up, I guess, the preamble for the big event that we hope to announce soon. Anyway, I could talk all day as always, so I think we'll leave it for there. It's great to get your take on the big stories, and as usual, you've made a lot of sense. So thanks again, mate, and we'll talk very soon.
No worries, Woody. Thank you, mate.
And to everyone at home, thanks again for joining me for today's Beyond Oil conversation. Over the coming days, we're going to be digging into exactly how Australia is shaping up for the transition to a low carbon world. And there are so many opportunities for us to lead the way in so many of these areas, and that in turn spells opportunities. So I hope you'll join me as we explore this emerging trend in more detail in the days ahead. Thanks again for your time. Cheers.